John with us today to talk about a new aspect of his research called the Trivium, the three ways or the three roads that together with four other subjects or arts called the Quadrivium together forms the 7 liberal arts. This is, or was rather, the foundation of a medieval liberal arts education. It's a method that pretty much have been thrown out of our so-called education system, and we are asking why. John has a new website set up called triviumeducation.com, where you can read more about this as we discuss the subject further on today's program.
The 7 liberal arts, and we have to remember, or what I should say is, we need to make a distinction that the modern liberal education that people might receive at a university or college is very rarely, if ever, the traditional 7 liberal arts or classical 7 liberal arts education as it was originally taught, unless one happens to have a teacher or professor who knows the traditional form and is just happens to be teaching the class, which I do hear from professors on occasion that do teach it and do know it, but they are rare. But the 7 liberal arts, let's start off by defining what the word liberal means first off. And the word liberal is defined as free by birth, hence befitting a free man or gentleman. And then somebody who's studied the liberal arts or liberal education, and it's also not strict or rigorous, not confined or restricted in the literal sense. It means free. So the word liberal is also where we get the word, or it's actually, the word liberal is derived from the word book. And libro or liber is Spanish for book, and Latin for books. So the freedom is in the books. But let me read you a quote here that is from Edward Bernays, that this is actually from the very first page of chapter 1 in Edward Bernays' 1928 book, Propaganda. And he says, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and the social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." And so what we're looking at is basically it's a system that the elites have established through B.F. Skinner, through Edward Bernays, through people like this.
Right, he's patting himself on the back right there in that quote and saying,
right,
look at me, what I've been able to do, basically.
Right, and he's even using propaganda or PR to sell his propaganda to justify his actions, right?
Yeah.
And basically, he says that it's a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Well, it's only logical because they have to enforce the dumbing down of the rest of us. And I think you've interviewed John Taylor Gatto on your show. Is that correct?
That is correct. Really good interview. Always a lot of fun hearing John Gatto. Yeah.
Right, and I've had him on my show a number of times as well, and he's just done a weekend with John Taylor Gatto that was recorded on July 4th weekend with Richard Andrew Grove at Tragedy and Hope, who is a partner of mine. And so he lays out really the dumbing down and how they're dumbing down the public mind through the education. So what Edward Bernays is really saying, and let me give you another quote here by Walter Lippmann. And Walter Lippmann, this is from his Public Opinion, which was published in 1922. We have learned to call this propaganda, a group of men who can prevent independent access to the event, can arrange the news to suit their purpose. In order to conduct a propaganda campaign, there must be some barrier between the public and the event. Access to the real environment must be limited before anyone can create a pseudo-environment he thinks wise or desirable. So what they're doing is they're manipulating the data that's being given to us. So, and in order to do this propaganda, this PR, as well as the marketing, the government systems that are out there today, they had to take something away from us, or at least covet or occult something from us, so that we could not see how all of this works. It's basically, in a way, what we're going to be discussing today is like taking the red pill and being able to see all of the lies coming down the screen like in the Matrix films, okay? And this is the 7 liberal arts education as it was traditionally taught. And as I said, the 7 liberal arts, the word liberal comes from freedom. And they've even spun the word liberal into its antithesis, meaning a tax and spend liberal, or a communist, or a socialist, which these are actually the antithesis of somebody who would be considered a liberal. You're not, a true liberal isn't somebody who wants to live off the tit of the government. They want to live on their own, right?
That's right, that's right. I wanted to ask you what you think happened to, I'm sure we'll get into it as well, but I want to ask you what you think happened to the teaching of the 7 liberal arts, because this to me then seems that this is a system that was derived for the elite pretty much in that sense, but this has now even that has gone underground, if you know what I mean, Jan, and what we've been given consequently the few 100 years after this disappearance is a much more boiled down version of this. Basically, it's been trimmed to fit the plebes, if you will. But go ahead, Jan.
Sure. Well, the 7 liberal arts is composed of 2 components called the Trivium and the Quadrivium. The Quadrivium was developed by Pythagoras, which he lived about 28 to 2,700 years ago or more. And the Trivium was largely created by Aristotle, who lived about 2,500 years ago. Now, Aristotle, when he published his work on the Trivium and on logic, Aristotle was Alexander the Great's mentor. And he got in trouble with Alexander the Great for publishing this information because it showed how the elites controlled the masses. And, so really what we're looking at is a system. It's sort of like, a lot of people know that the Kabbalah can be used for mind control and for negative purposes. But what we're looking at here is the same can also be true for the Trivium. And the only way that these systems can be used for mind control against you is by you deciding not to understand how they can be used against you. You have to maintain your own ignorance, or you have to choose to ignore the information, which is where the word ignorance comes from. And the word occult means simply hidden, and the word and educate actually means to unoccult. So when you get educated in something, you're no longer in the dark about it. You're no longer unaware or ignorant about it. And so these systems like the Kabbalah and like the Trivium, the only way that they can really be used against you, I mean, even if you're aware of them, somebody might try, but you're a lot more likely to pick up on any attempt at these things being used against you if you've studied them and you're aware of them, than if you're completely ignorant of them and you choose entirely not to study them. This is why they're called the liberal arts, which means of or befitting the free. Okay, so to not know them is basically slavery or servitude. And so this is why it's important to study this stuff. And so what they've done, like I said, they've twisted the word liberal. They've also twisted the word trivium, and they've tried to trivialize the word trivium and its importance. And in fact, even I looked up on the Encyclopedia Britannica's website, and they had a a wrong definition on their own website. So I contacted one of the academics, one of the professor editors at the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I asked him about it, and he says, "Oh, that's completely false. Where did you ever get the idea that the trivium came from the word trivial came from the word trivium? The word trivium means three roads crossing in Latin, and the word trivial derives from this other word." And I said, "Well, that's exactly my point, sir, because I got that from your publication." And so he wasn't even aware that the Encyclopedia Britannica was misrepresenting trivium and trivial. So let's get into what the trivium is. And the trivium is composed of three components, which is the first one is, and let me just switch what's on my screen here. The first one is grammar, and grammar is actually knowledge. And grammar, there are two different types of grammar that, as we can see it. Most people, when they hear the word grammar, they would think, Henrik, why the heck are you having someone on your show to give us a lesson about grammar? Okay, so, there's two different types of grammar. There's grammar that relates to a specified language like English, Russian, or Latin, and the words and sentence structure and everything within that language. And then there's general grammar, which relates to the words of objective reality in any language and applies to all subjects as the first set of building blocks to an integrated or fully mindful objective study or body of knowledge. So basically, we can think of general grammar as doing research, okay? And what general grammar does is it answers the question of who, what, where, and when, okay? And special grammar applies to, again, the punctuation and grammar and understanding that the letters and things that you're dealing with and how to put them together properly. Okay, so when we are looking into a subject, the first thing we have to, the first things that we need to know are who, what, where, and when. Otherwise, we don't have any knowledge about what's going on. If I came up to you, Henrik, and I said, Henrik, why does that machine over there work? And if you haven't gone over and looked at it and studied it, you probably wouldn't have any who, what, where, when, or et cetera of how this thing works.
Right.
And you wouldn't be able to explain that to somebody else. So it's important that we always, before coming to conclusions, and this is one of the main issues that I see as a global problem today, everywhere, is people coming to conclusions before they've asked who, what, where, and when. And this is known as putting your logic first. And so this is actually, I think, part of the removal of the trivium from education. And you asked earlier when it came out of our education. I think it came out about in the 1850s is when they started to remove it, and probably by the 1920s in the United States. It had been effectively removed except in small pockets, and some people even attribute the American Revolution and the American Industrial Age to the trivium and the teaching of the trivium in the old single-room schoolhouses. So this is all sort of integrated and put in together. But we can understand, John, that it's a dangerous thing. In other words, this education, the knowledge that is acquired through the, if you will, the proper understanding of the world, your surrounding, and so forth, that becomes right. You get an empowered population because of it, and that exactly,
from their point of view
is exactly the key.
Yeah.
That's exactly the key, is you're empowering them, which enables the public to see the stuff that Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann and B.F. Skinner were talking about. B.F. Skinner said, "Give me a child and I'll shape him into anything." Right?
See that? So just one more point on that, Jan, because I think that's a really important point. That means, in other words, as well, that they are not in any regard better or superior if we look at the elite or those who have enslaved humanity.
You just hit it exactly on the head. What they're trying to do is they're trying to play this whole genetic eugenicist, you can even throw Zionist philosophy in there, and trying to say that one group is above all of the others. But what they're really doing is they're using a specific way of thinking to have an edge up on other people. And by you having this system, you can see how they're attempting to manipulate you.
That's right.
Okay. So, yeah, so you exactly hit it on the head. So what happens when people don't understand the trivium, or even if you get the trivium out of order, the trivium, you know, some people will teach the trivium as grammar, logic, and rhetoric as three distinct and separate courses of study. And you know, myself and the people that I work with, we completely disagree with that. We see it as a functioning system. And the reason that it's a functioning system is when you put it always in order, grammar, logic, rhetoric, it functions as a wheel or a sort of corkscrew so that you can go up and down levels in research to verify and recheck the data that you're dealing with. You're going, you know, when somebody asks at you how, you go back and you look through logic of the why, which forces you to go back down into the grammar of the who, what, where, and when before you come back up with more data. So it's like this system, like a corkscrew, that enables you to go up and down into any subject matter, whether you're studying basket weaving or astronomy, and or you want to be a chef or whatever you're looking to do, you can use that same information to dig down, get to the foundations of what you're attempting to do, and come back up. And, with the proper information. So what happens is when we fail to do that, it's known as putting your logic before your grammar. And logic is understanding. Okay, and logic answers the why of a subject, but without knowing what you're talking about first, and grammar is knowledge, without knowing who, what, where, and when first, exactly what are you understanding, right?
Yeah.
So see, just by asking what are you understanding, that forces you to go back down to grammar and ask who, what, where, and when. Right. So a lot of people, if you make a statement about something, they'll say, "Oh, Henrik, you're just a conspiracy theorist. The government could never do that." Rather, and you're sitting there holding this stack of data for them to go through, and they refuse to look at it. They're putting their logic first. They've already made up their minds. Don't, as the old saying goes, don't confuse me with facts. I've already made up my mind.
Yep,
right.
That's right.
So what they're doing is they're putting their logic or their decision first, their why something is, before they've ever asked who, what, where, and when, and looked at the actual data. Okay? So then what happens then is people who don't go back down to that level of grammar and look at the who, what, where, when, and then come up before they ask why. And let me add that logic is developing the faculty of reason and establishing non-contradictory relationships, and it reveals a systematic understanding of the items that you're dealing with, and it's a guide for thinking correctly, for thinking without contradiction. It's so, as Ayn Rand defined it, it is the art of non-contradictory identification. And interestingly, Ayn Rand was one, if you read her book, she was one that very commonly put logic before grammar. She would come to conclusions that were wrong, like if you study Anthony Sutton or Carol Quigley or Douglas Reed or some of these types of works, you'll clearly see right away that she didn't put her grammar before her logic. She came to conclusions before proper study. It doesn't mean that all of Ayn Rand's philosophy is bad. It just means that she didn't have a proper understanding of the trivium and how to gather data before coming to a conclusion. And so,
Jan, do you see that there is a problematic aspect here, though, if we incorporate philosophy into this? Because at a certain point there, if you are into certain philosophical areas, so to speak, there will be contradictory things.
Right. Well, see, here's the issue, Henrik, is the ancients believed, post Aristotle anyway, that you couldn't even study philosophy if you didn't already have a foundation in the trivium. See, what a lot of people don't know, and maybe this is a good segue here, what a lot of people don't know is that there's this ancient conversation going on since Socrates all the way to the present called the Great Conversation. And it's found in the great books of the Western world. And it's the great books of the Western world is 54 or 60 volumes now up to the present day. And they're getting harder and harder to get copies of, but you can go to used bookstores sometimes and find them Trivium for the, I don't know what it would be in Sweden, but equivalent of $100, $200. But this is all of the, or just about all of the major philosophers of the last the 2,500 years, and it's a continuing conversation that each generation builds on the last. And to really even be able to get in and understand the great conversation, you first have to have studied the Trivium and Quadrivium. So, this is one of the ways that they keep people out of understanding how everything is being done to them, and where the contradictions come in that you mentioned. And I like to jab at Kant, because I think that Kant gave us the contradictions, and it's Kant's philosophies that have really had the biggest detriment on us, and the irrationality of the New World Order and many of the other things that are being pushed upon the people today, as well as I think the positivist movement is largely from Kant. It's people who instead of taking action against a wrong, they'll say, oh, well, that's negative. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. See, they're choosing ignorance rather than understanding. So they automatically block out information. And I've heard many hippie-type people who will say that something is negative and they'll refuse to check it out. They'll choose ignorance. And I think it's to their own and everyone else's detriment, because who does that decision work for? Does it work in your favor or the elitist New World Order's favor for you to sit there and not take action when you see injustice? Yeah, well, right. If you're gonna, if somebody, like, let's say there are three people and they're in a race and they're at the starting line, okay, and one of them is a positive thinker, one is neither positive nor negative, and the other one is very negative. Which one do you think would win the race?
Jesus, does it even matter? That's a difficult one, actually.
Well, see, it's what I'm getting at is it's about taking action and not. See, the joke is that the positive thinker would get upset about the negative thinker being there and sit down and meditate to clear the air. The negative thinker, while he might be negative and bitch and moan and complain the whole time, he's going to get to the finish line, and he's probably going to tie about the same time with the one who's not positive or negative, who was stopping and smelling the flowers along the way. So it shows you that typically people who only want to be positive, they're not being holistic or critical thinkers, and people often see critical thinking as being negative. Okay,
yeah, that's true.
But what positive thinking is out of balance. If you're positive all the time, you're not being balanced. And if you look at the Kabbalah, one of the ways that in the Kabbalah that mind control can be used is to group you into one of the sephira where you would only be thinking positively. And so you need to remember that you have all of these sides. There's a yin and a yang in balance in nature. There's day and night, there's good and bad, there's a balance to the nature in the universe. So if we're always only focusing on one side and refusing to absolutely look at the other under any circumstance, then we can actually very easily be controlled and manipulated through that.
Absolutely. It's also what I see, obviously, that this is also about what kind of information, or the data, if you will, then that you get access to. In order to make the proper judgment or decision. I don't know if this is jumping ahead, Jan, but if we just briefly look into that idea, that you must be able to have all the variables, if you will, within your parameters to make the proper decision, much in the same way that many of these people, they want to, this has nothing to do with empirical data, if you will, that they're actually not truly observing reality the way it is. I mean, and this goes back then to Rand's, if you will, objectivism. Right. How can we be truly objective in a world where we possibly cannot know all the variables? We cannot know all the truth, right?
Well, see, that's the thing is and that's correct in a way, but what the Trivium does, and when it's put in a functioning system, in a wheel or in a corkscrew type fashion, always going around, it always teaches you to go back down and look at the data, and you can actually dig down through the information coming in via the five senses. You can dig down and you can find all of the available data on a particular subject, and you can decide with that available data, you can decide if you have reached a final conclusion, you know, A or B, yes or no, or if you need to do more research, or if it's true or false, etc.
Right.
You know, so, and even if you've come to a conclusion at that particular point in history, and you know if a statement is true or false, by using the Trivium as a functioning system, you always know to go back and check things if new data ever comes in. Right? So then you're always able to go back, and you have a functioning method to go back and look on, and you know exactly how you derived that conclusion the last time you went through it. So then you can very quickly and easily go back and look at it. And doing so is sort of like, it's a mental antivirus system, because that way, you know, you get these chain emails where people send you out something ridiculous, and, you know, and you, send it on to 20 other people or whatever, or, you know, there's a, you know, the spider on the toilet seat is going to bite you. And, you know, a lot of people don't go to snoops.com or one of these websites to check and see if the chain email that they're spreading around is true or not. And what happens is, if you, for instance, you know, let's say it takes you 30 seconds or maybe 5 minutes to go on Snoops or go online and verify if this chain email is correct or not before you send it on, right? But let's say if you don't verify it and you just send it on and you send it out to 100 people, you've just taken up all of those people's time, multiplied many times over, simply because you didn't verify that information. And if you send out false information, it's like you're sending out a virus. You're sending out bad information to other people. And what happens to your computer when it gets a virus on it? If somebody doesn't have an antivirus software on their computer, and they get an email from somebody with a virus, and it goes into their email box, and it sends out another several hundred emails and infects all of those people downstream, just because that one person without the antivirus isn't checking that data, now all of those other people out there have this virus. And we see this every few years. There'll be a global computer virus that takes out companies and emails and all of this stuff because people passed on information that they didn't verify. You know, we're looking at a macro and a micro. We're looking at two different things here, you know, computer systems and humans. But I think the analogy is clear that when people themselves don't take a minute or two to verify that information, the time that's taken up downstream is many-fold greater. Okay. So, you know, take the time to verify information before you pass it on. You know, ask who, what, where, and when. And that way, you are coming to a position of certainty. You either know for certain that you need to do more research. You know, it's either A or B. I need to do more research to find out. Or by using logic and logical fallacies and understanding sentence structure and all of this, you can see if one side is using fallacies and isn't substantiating their facts and is making fallacious claims, then you can dismiss it, right? And you can figure out which person is making the better argument, which we haven't really gone into yet. But so anyway, the third part of the Trivium is rhetoric, and it is the how of a subject. So before you can go to other people and explain how something works properly, you have to have answered the why and the who, what, where, and when. You've had to have done your grammar and logic. First, you've gathered all of the data with the grammar, and you've removed the contradictions with the logic, and you've answered why something works the way it does. Now, when somebody asks you how, you're able to express that cogently and clearly and pass on clear information without noise in the signal. And so this is what is lacking in our education systems today, which people very definitely had. You know, I've read letters from soldiers in the American Civil War that were far more articulate than your average person today that you would even meet online or anywhere. And
especially online, Jan, we know that.
Yeah.
The internet lingo and everything is boiled down, and it's Orwell's, nightmare unfolding here, basically, in terms of our vocabulary, you know.
Absolutely. You just hit that one on the head too. And in fact, I have a book sitting around here somewhere that's on that very subject. It's called Less Than Words Can Say. That's on this very subject and the constant dumbing down of language. So, you know, and I mentioned logical fallacies a minute ago. We should probably cover some of the logical fallacies and people need to understand the logical fallacies, I think, first, because you can begin to apply them right away. And the logical fallacies is really how you can knowing the logical fallacies is like taking the red pill in the Matrix. That's the best analogy, I think. And there's two types or two categories of logical fallacies. There's formal and informal. And formal fallacies are based strictly on the logical formation of an argument, which is deductive. Informal fallacies are the most commonly recognized and easiest to learn, and they take into account non-logical content of an argument, or inductive, and are false for epistemological, dialectical, or pragmatic reasons. And the informal fallacies fall under three categories, which are relevance, presumption, and ambiguity. And so when we understand the logical fallacies, and I should mention that the word fallacy comes from the Latin fallare, which means to lie. And so when people use these different types of fallacies, they are in fact lying. And there's two different types of people who use fallacies. There are your average person who's never studied logic or any of this type of thing, and they're just doing it ignorantly. They're not aware of it, and they're not educated. And then there's the other type who does this stuff intentionally. They're the sophists. This is where we get the word sophisticated from. And so these are typically the elites, the lawyers, the marketers, the propagandists, the politicians, these type of people. They're the sophisticated class, the sophists, and they're using this type of information to control the rest of society. And so we can go into some of the logical fallacies now.
I want to ask you, before we go there, Jan, a little bit about the right type of information again, if we go back to that idea of because if we're thinking about this idea of the circle or the spiral that you mentioned, that we can go around in this idea of, okay, do I need to collect more data or more research in order to find out what actually is going on about whatever subject, basically. There is a potentiality there that we might end up, obviously, in one way, running in a circle. We could also be put down by the idea of... Oh, go ahead, Jan.
I don't agree with that you would be left just going in a circle, because... the idea of doing that in and of itself is always self-corrective. I think that not doing it is what gets us in a circle in the first place, because we're not asking who, what, where, and when. We haven't checked our data, and we jump to false conclusions without any information or proper study. And I think that the going in the circle bit is exactly what our entire society is doing right now without the Trivium. So I would completely beg to differ with you on that, because always going back to the ground level and checking yourself and making sure that you're making your decisions on solid information is what's going to give you strong self-esteem and strong knowledge that you're making the right decision. So
I see what you mean, Jan, definitely. I guess what I'm alluding to then, in one sense of all of this, is the quality of the information that we are getting. Let's say, for instance, that we want to find out something about the Celts or the Druids, then, let's say.
Sure.
And if the only data that we can assess comes from, Julius Caesar, because it's the only one that is actually written down by, and
you're limited to the information available that you can bring in via the five senses.
Right.
So, so obviously, if you knew that, well, Julius Caesar is the only source, or, do I have to go out and dig in the field and do my own archaeology work to find out more who, what, where, and when, then that's what I have to do. You can understand that this one source, based on logical fallacies, and we're just about to go into the logical fallacies, but if one side is making a biased argument against the other, the logical fallacies and knowing how sentences are put together, and if a statement is logical, or if someone is attempting to use these fallacies against you, 99 times out of 100, it will reveal those false attempts just in the nature of using logic itself.
I see. Okay. Well, that's interesting then, because that's kind of the nature what I wanted to get to, like basically how far does it take you in terms of, or are you only limited within the field of academia, meaning you're an armchair researcher, or does it actually take you out into the physical world as well? You know?
Well, no, see, because remember the general grammar aspect deals with reality, with, you know, trees, plants, animals, cars, roads, houses, buildings, books.
Yeah.
Anything that's out there in reality can fall under general grammar, whereas special grammar deals with the building blocks of a specialized language like English or Russian or Latin, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the general grammar always takes you back out into what's out in reality, to look at what's there and to go, okay, this is what I need to do to gather more information before I, you know, go back in and derive a final conclusion.
Excellent.
Okay.
Individual assessment of the situation, in other words, and not relying on the data that is available necessarily only.
Right, exactly. So it's always, you know, you're always saying, okay, what was this person's background? Where did he come from? Did he have an agenda? Who was he working for? Is he using false rhetoric in here? Is the information that he provides, or she, well cited? And are those sources easy to find? Are those sources verifiable? Are they misquoted, etc.? So you can go back in and check out all of that, you know, and in fact, this is exactly what I did when I wrote my last book, The Holy Mushroom, when I was on your show last time, with all of the attacks that were used against John Allegro, primarily by R. Gordon Wasson. And so what I did is I was actually the first in 40 years since Allegro published that book to actually check each one of his footnotes and then go get the citation that he used in that footnote and verify it, put them all together, and go straight down the line and see if his citations checked out, which in fact they did, contrary to every scholar's opinion out there for the last 40 years, right? And then on top of that, I was also able to find ancient primary texts that substantiated. One of the texts specifically mentioned the quote-unquote holy mushroom. So here we had an ancient primary text specifically backing up Allegro's thesis, and today we also have about 3,000 other images and things like that, you know, in 1970 we didn't have the internet and there was only one or two, right? So you know, so this is how we can go back down and dig down and not take one person or one group's opinion. And going into that, we can begin by looking at the informal logical fallacies. And like I said, there's 3 different groups of them, being relevance, presumption, and ambiguity, that they primarily fall under. And so I'm just going to go down the list of some of these first, and then we'll focus on a few of them. But ad hominem, appeal to authority, appeal to belief, appeal to consequences of a belief, appeal to emotion, appeal to fear, appeal to flattery, appeal to novelty, appeal to pity, to popularity, to ridicule, to spite, to tradition. Then there's the bandwagon fallacy. There's begging the question or circular reasoning. There's the bias sample. There's burden of proof, circumstantial ad hominem, confusing cause and effect, false dilemma, gambler's fallacy, the genetic fallacy. There's guilt by association, hasty generalization, the middle ground fallacy, and this is only a small listing of them. There's actually a couple of hundred out there that are known, and the list will never be complete because people can always think of new lies.
That's right,
and ways to lie.
Well,
but,
I mean, you know, the conspiracy movement would do good to examine some of these points.
Absolutely,
you know?
and that's the whole idea of getting this information out there, is because if the conspiracy movement can go through all of this and learn how these lies work, they'll be able to go back through and filter out all of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there against the so-called truth movement, and they'll be able to refine the argument, refine the data about 9/11 or about any other subject, and get more hardcore facts, filter out what's false. When someone like Jason Burmis and Dylan Avery went on Popular Mechanics, or went up against Popular Mechanics on Democracy Now! Several years ago, if they had been armed with this information when they went up there, instead of throwing logical fallacies back at the Popular Mechanics guys, they would have been able to say, oh, well, that was a slippery slope, or that was a straw man, or that was a red herring argument, or you're using an appeal to fear, that was an appeal to ridicule. You know, if you can't make an argument here on national television without using logical fallacies, then that tells me and everyone else that you're intellectually bankrupt, Mr. Popular Mechanics. And that's how it should have gone down.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, but we can't, you know, all we can say is coulda, shoulda, woulda, and move forward from here. And this is what needs to be done. People need to learn and study how these things work so that they can go back in and make a solid argument and present this stuff. And whenever, you know, somebody says, Henrik, you're just a conspiracy theorist, ha 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 ha, you know, that's an ad hominem, number one, conspiracy theorist, because rather than looking at the data you're presenting, they're attacking you. Number two, it's an appeal to ridicule. An appeal to ridicule is a really interesting one, because an appeal to ridicule is just, Henrik, you're wrong because, ha 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 ha.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the whole argument.
All they got right there. Yeah.
That's all they've got right there. So when you can spot this type of lie, it makes it a lot easier for you. So now when you go through life, and you know, at first when you start learning the fallacies, you'll be doing a lot of stumbling and things, and it's like learning how to walk. A child doesn't get up and run on the first day. They fall a lot. So, you know, for the first year and a half, you need to study like a fallacy a day. And in fact, somebody just started the FALLACIEAday.com website, I think it is, to help fill this need. And, but you can study a fallacy a day, or you can, get out there and learn all of the different logical fallacies. And once you get to know the names of the fallacies and how they work, what it's doing is it's taking your knowledge from implicit knowledge to explicit knowledge. So implicit knowledge is like you go to some guy at the swap meet or a car dealership and you get that funny feeling in your stomach that, you know, that guy I think that guy's lying to me, but I'm not quite sure. You know, I get this funny feeling. Whereas explicit knowledge, you say, oh, well, you know, he just used an appeal to flattery, an appeal to popularity. He said, oh, I'm going to have all the hot chicks if I get the leather seats, and you know, uses all of this misleading vividness and all of this stuff to sell me this product. So now you're not left with just this funny feeling. You're able to identify explicitly the exact lie that was just used against you.
It's a method to verify your intuition and your hunch, something that obviously your unconscious picks up on all the time, right?
You just hit it on the head again, and that's exactly right, because all the implicit knowledge should do is trigger you to go, aha, what was that? Let's turn on the Trivium and let's run this through grammar logic before we before we come to any conclusions or pass any information on. Let's process this through the Trivium and then see what's going on here. So the implicit, or that intuitive, funny feeling aha moment, should only be a trigger to turn on a systematic method of verification. It shouldn't be the final conclusion. Right. Like I see many people in the New Age movement that they'll get a funny feeling. Oh, one day and I've been to plenty of New Age conferences where there's dozens of these people where they think, oh, well, you know, I'm a channeler and therefore I had a funny feeling. I got this channeled information and therefore I know it's true. You know, this person is a lizard or an alien because my parents got a funny feeling when they were watching TV. Really? That's all you have to go on? Well, at that point,
you're in the realm of an area that can't be proven or disproven either, which is a comfortable place to be for some, obviously. Right?
No, it's not, because then it's called arguing the arbitrary, and it's automatically dismissed. You're arguing for something that you have no evidence for whatsoever. See, you have to remember, going back to objective reality, that you're bringing in information through your five senses, and you're verifying it. You're asking who, what, where, when, and when before you say why or how. So somebody who is just getting a funny feeling and then takes that as fact, well, you know, Rene Descartes was criticized a lot for that. Kant was criticized a lot for that. Just coming up with ideas and thinking that they reflect reality, when in fact you have no verification of that. So if somebody says, well, Donald Rumsfeld is a lizard, my friend had a funny feeling or something like that, you need to be able to verify through the five senses, ask who, what, where, and when, ask if there is some Alison Bailey Fabian socialist agenda for getting you to believe that theory. Okay.
Does it, to you, John, exclude all the metaphysics, if you will, the paranormal?
Well, no, you don't exclude it all. See, what's interesting is the Trivium and Quadrivium, the third part, and I haven't really discussed the Quadrivium yet, but interestingly, the Trivium and Quadrivium will plug right into sacred geometry and into the Kabbalah, into philosophy and things like this. But what it does, and into the Kabbalah obviously ties into tarot, obviously ties into astrology and all of these different things. But what it does is it gives you a systematic method for understanding how the ancients came up with these ideas and how they do work. And what you understand is that while it gives you an image of yourself, you don't have to base every single aspect as fact. And what these things should do is give you a hint or a clue to go out and verify as much as possible that information is real before you pass it on to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Responsibility right there, but before you...
before you pass that mental virus on down the line, we're going back to that mental the mental virus, and the Trivium being an mental antivirus system and always checking that data. And the New Age movement, the positivist movement, I think that they're the most guilty of this type of behavior and quote unquote thinking. They're not verifying the information. They're just spreading it out there, and that can be very detrimental to everyone downstream that we're actually trying to help up and empower. So, and what the Trivium does is the Trivium is really, there are all these different issues out there that we need to focus on. And, I've been an activist for more than 20 years. And what I realized one day several years ago was that I was figuratively whacking at the branches on all of these different subjects. And so what I started looking for was a root cause of all of this that could be focused on. And, by focusing on the root, it would resolve the other issues. And the Trivium and Quadrivium are just that. When you empower someone else with the ability to spot logical fallacies when politicians or anyone else is feeding you bunk, or in a book or in a newspaper or anywhere else, when you empower those people to see all of this stuff, then we're correcting all of that out of the system. We're eliminating all of that noise that is used to corrupt and control us.
That's a really good point, I think, as well, because if we think about the fruits from the YouTube tree, right, with all the comments and all these the open source idea with all the now violence that is going on in terms of so-called debating with people back and forth. It's not really debating, of course. It's not a academic discussion that is going on. This is just people throwing crap at each other, basically.
Well, this is due specifically to the dumbing down of the global population. People don't have critical thinking, so they'll sit there and throw ad hominem attacks at each other. You're a fag, or you're an idiot, or you're stupid, or this or that, and all of this nonsense. When instead of digging back down, looking at the information, and coming back up and having a valid, logical conclusion. So when you go onto YouTube and start debating someone and they start throwing logical fallacies at you, point out their logical fallacies instead, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is we're creating a meme of people who understand and who can see through the matrix, right? They can see through all of those lies. Also from Sir Thomas More, which is up on the Trivium Education website, and he says, "For if you, the rulers, suffer your people to be ill-educated, and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for these crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else can be concluded from this, but that you first make thieves and outlaws, and then punish them?" And that's from Sir Thomas More's book Utopia, from I think the early 16th century, from roughly the 1520s or 1530s. So what we're looking here is people, by not having this systematic method, they are creating the criminals and the outlaws of these people who don't have this ability, and then they blame them for not having the critical thinking. And they blame them for the elites will say, you know, the stupid, ignorant masses, or the proles, the proletariat, the dead, this type, the profane, all of these words. This is all based on people not first and foremost having the trivium, but also the quadrivium on top of that, and then having a understanding of philosophy, especially at least some of the foundation of the great books of the Western world. Before I end the call, Henrik, I do want to mention very quickly the quadrivium, which is the second aspect of the 7 liberal arts, the first being, as I said, the trivium. But the quadrivium is based on arithmetic or mathematics, and then geometry is second, music or harmonic theory is third, and then astronomy is fourth, or you could actually say that's fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, since it's the 7 liberal arts. But the quadrivium pertains to matter and quantity, the advanced 4. And mathematics is number in itself, a pure abstraction outside of space and time. And then geometry is number in space. And then music or harmonic theory is number in time. And then astronomy is number in space and time. And again, just like the trivium, these have to be taught in order. You need to know math before you study geometry. You need to know geometry before, like what they do in the United States, what they did to me, which screwed me up, was they taught me math, and then they taught me algebra before geometry. And you have to have the proper order so that you have a foundation and understanding of how these things were derived historically, and then this helps your own mind build upon how the ancients built upon this very knowledge themselves.